You've heard it all before. The inspiring quotes, change your thinking, it'll change your life. First say yes, then figure out how to do it. True life is lived when tiny changes occur. And I certainly can't disagree with him. I've subtitled my talk, Bravery is the Only Choice, Lessons in Embracing the Unknown. Because just making well thought out choices isn't always the answer to leading the life you want. And I emphasize the life you want. Firstly, even if you think through all the outcomes logically, you just simply do not know what lies ahead. And secondly, if you don't know what the future holds, then you must certainly be a bit brave, at least a bit brave, to go ahead and make that choice anyway. Particularly if it's not within society's norms and expectations, because society generally rewards normal, careful, well thought out behavior. So for example, if as an adult you choose to climb a tree and fall out and break your arm, chances are you'll get a bit of sympathy, but mostly that was a daft thing to do. And if you don't get a job that supports the lifestyle your neighbors expect of you, then again, there's something not quite right. And if you don't marry that nice guy in your 20s, well then, unlucky, missed opportunities. And if through your own choices you end up a miserable spinster, well, it's your own fault. For the record, I haven't fallen out of a tree. I work for myself. In truth, I work for my clients, actually. I love what I do, although my boss definitely needs to pay me more. And yes, I'm almost 50, single, never married, but miserable is not a word people associate with me. You can tell from this picture just how brave I am. And in case anyone is wondering, I did manage to control myself and not actually soil my undergarments. I am petrified of spiders and snakes. But the girl whose pet spider this was convinced me that we were close enough to a hospital and her car was fast enough to get me there if I got bit. There should have been a clue in that. But I took my chances anyway. I was really petrified. And the upshot, a ridiculous picture that shows just how scared I was. But hey, I get to post it on social media and talk about it every once in a while. See, I'm like that. Sometimes the downside is horrific, and sometimes the upside is not blatantly obvious. So, in this case particularly, some would call me frivolous, while those who think they're more astute would say I don't understand risk-reward. But I'm an asset manager, and I understand risk-reward very well. What I've learned only in the last couple of years, though, is that I'm actually brave, almost inherently so, as if I don't understand the downside of making what others may call bad choices. But then, looking back at my life, I've also learned that the unknown is not nearly as terrible as we think it's going to be. At the end of 2009, I got offered a job to work for the African Development Bank in Tunis. This was immediately after having worked for a large international investment bank, the last of which was in the US, a US bank in London, which came with a very vivid experience of the global financial crisis, where I stood on the second floor trading room looking out the window at hundreds of Lehman employees carrying out their boxes as the company went into bankruptcy. So you'd think I'd jump at the opportunity to go work for a development bank, where apparently the motive is not purely profit and employees are not considered easily expendable assets, or as we were in investment banking. I'd already been on a trip to Tunis, so think old Roman ruins, beautiful Mediterranean beaches, traditional souks, and generally cheap living close to Europe. But I realized that it was definitely a developing country. The beaches and city centers were strewn with litter. And it certainly was not the Côte d'Azur or the Italian Riviera that I'd become accustomed to during my days in investment banking. In addition, my Arabic was non-existent and my French needed a lot more work if I was going to survive there. And the job was in fixed income when, by that time, I had morphed into an equity derivatives specialist. So I'd almost be setting myself up for failure. Oh, and what about being a fiercely independent, single, Catholic-raised woman alone in an Arab country? The downside was clearly more apparent than the upside, because I could have returned to South Africa and with London experience on my CV gotten a great job. And when you think about the whole independent female thing, it probably just wasn't a good idea. But in a brief conversation with a friend, she said, "Why don't you accept the job now? If you don't like it, you can change your mind, but this opportunity is unlikely to present itself again in the future." It didn't quite negate the downside. It made a little bit of sense, so I accepted the job. Did I love it? Not really. I don't enjoy working in an admin-intensive or bureaucratic environment, and the African Development Bank is not a government institution. It's a 63 governments institution. So after the third month of being there, I called a different friend, a more pragmatic friend, I thought, and said, "I think I've made a mistake. This is not for me. I hate it." His sage and rather unemotional advice was to hang in for a few more months, and so I did. And during my time there, more than once I was harassed in the streets. And in fact, I'll tell you a story. In spite of Tunisia being a very secular country at the time, one of my Portuguese friends once went out in summer with her shoulders slightly uncovered, which apparently was allowed because we were allowed bikinis on the beach even. And still, a few young men picked up stones, tiny stones, and threw it at her. I mean, that was a message. It wasn't a dangerous thing that happened, but the atmosphere was obviously a lot less accepting than we had thought. And to top it all, a year after I joined the African Development Bank, they threw in a revolution. Well, not the African Development Bank. The Tunisians threw in a revolution which scared me to literal tears and cost a fortune in used ferry tickets and flights because of imposed curfews. Having grown up in a country that underwent its own revolution is one thing, but being caught up in someone else's revolution is awful. So here's the upshot. My French improved. I learned a few basic Arabic words. I made friends with some wonderful people. I trained for and completed my first full Ironman, learned to kitesurf, learned how to handle myself as a single woman in a very foreign country. So you see, these are considerations or goals I didn't even know were on the table when I took the job. But even the terrible experience of going through the revolution that is credited for starting the Arab Spring doesn't only make for good dinner conversation, but has shaped me in a way that choosing the other option or going back to my home country and getting a great job never could have. The unknown of that experience turned out to be some of the best things that happened to me. In fact, I have to tell you that even ending up in finance can be construed as, shall we call it, an accident for now. You see, I grew up a colored girl in the Apartheid era, and even though my father was a bank manager, I didn't realize that women went into finance. So much for career guidance. I didn't even know what investment banking was. I was going to be a teacher because that's a noble profession for a young lady, especially a colored lady. And the accidental part of this story is that the decision to get into finance was made in a pub in London. At the time, I was working in business development for a fine wine trading business because even in my late 20s, I still had no idea what I really wanted to be when I grew up. So by then, my then boss, I should say, who not only owned the fine wine business, but used to be a stock market trader, and after a couple of glasses of wine, admitted that he thought I was quite bolshy and that I had the temperament of a trader. Mostly, he'd probably had enough of my stubbornness, but I think it was meant as a compliment. However, that evening, I actually had to look up what a stock market trader did. Today, I own my own asset management business, and I am one of a handful of South African black female managers in my industry. I know what you're thinking, so let's quickly clarify. I'm colored, I live in South Africa, so I'm classified as black. And that's a far road to travel from a pub in North London via the Arab Spring. And make no mistake, not every decision we make is easily corrected or necessarily the safest option. In my case, some people would consider that not or never having been married or having children is a missed experience. But the most important thing for me is that in spite of the social pressures, I'm doing what I love and what is important to me. I know it's taken a lot of big, audacious decisions and also many small, almost innocuous ones to get me here. And in truth, I don't really know where it comes from. But what I do realize that it has taken a certain strength and sense of bravery to make decisions that are generally against the norm or against my perceived view, or I should say outside of my perceived view of the normal world. I've recently been reminded that whilst I was part of the first grade 1 class in 1976 that started school under police guard, and this because colored girls were joining a school that was previously reserved for white people under the Apartheid system. I don't remember the incident at all, but there's definitely something in it. Many of us, 44 years later, are still friends today. And although we are all very different from each other, and I often think we have less in common than, if you like, shorter-lived adult friendships, clearly the experience of being pioneers into this unknown, if you like, has tied us together for life. And through all of this, and in the current environment, charged with racism, in an industry that is built on male bravado, I'm not embarrassed to say, volatility of stock markets, and an uncertain economic future in a country that imposes BE regulations and loves to label people, there are two quotes that have rung true for me and give me strength to remember who I am and urge me to make the right decisions for me, the right decisions for me. The first you've already seen. It's by the world-famous feminist Gloria Steinem, who said, whoever has power takes over the noun and the norm, while the less powerful get an adjective. And there are many instances where you could apply this. So in my case, I dislike being labeled with adjectives. For example, I am not Joe's wife, the black female asset manager who likes doing triathlons. I am an asset manager and Ironman. And then the second quote by writer Leila Delia is a follow-on from that. She remembered who she was and the game changed. I didn't get here by accident, and neither did I get here by careful planning. I got here by making brave choices and more than once tackling the unknown and coming out the other side with a smile on my face and I think better